You wouldn't believe how a mundane Tuesday evening completely reshaped my perspective on life. It began as a simple favor for my son, hosting a brief visit from a colleague of his, but it blossomed into a memory I will guard jealously for the rest of my days. It was one of those rare instances where life catches you off guard, not with a shock, but with a warm embrace. It's a story about the bridges we build between generations and the unexpected ways we can still be discovered when we think we've become invisible. Before we step into this story, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And tell me in the comments what city are you listening from tonight. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's begin. I had spent the better part of the afternoon polishing the mahogany coffee table and straightening the landscape paintings in the hallway. At 78, I've come to appreciate that the atmosphere of a home is in the details. It's a way of offering respect to anyone who crosses your threshold, whether they are family or a complete stranger. The late afternoon sun was pooling on the rug, and the house had settled into that heavy, comfortable silence that only old houses seem to possess. My son David had called to say his friend Julian needed to drop off some paperwork and might stay for a quick coffee. I knew very little about Julian other than that he was a writer of some sort, quiet, and arguably too young to find conversation with me interesting. I wasn't expecting much. Around 6 o'clock, the brass knocker rapped against the front door. When I opened it, I found Julian standing there, clutching not just the paperwork but a small brown paper bag from the local bakery. "Good evening, Mrs. Eleanor," he said, his voice a rich baritone that seemed too big for his slender frame. "David said you liked lemon tarts. I hope I'm not overstepping." "Not at all," I smiled, stepping back to let him in. "Please, call me Eleanor." Coming out of the wind, he moved with a deliberate calmness, stepping into the foyer as if he were entering a library. I watched him pause by the entryway, his eyes scanning the spines of the books on the shelves, not with polite disinterest, but with genuine hunger. I guided him to the sunroom, and he set the pastries down with care. We started with the usual pleasantries, the biting autumn wind, David's chaotic work schedule, the traffic in the city center. But there was a heaviness in the air, a sort of gravitational pull that suggested we were both capable of more than weather talk. Julian had a way of holding eye contact that was intense without being aggressive. He listened, really listened, as if my words were something tangible he was collecting. I found myself leaning back in my armchair, the tension leaving my shoulders. "You know," he said suddenly, gesturing to a watercolor painting on the far wall, "that piece feels incredibly lonely, but in a peaceful way. Did you paint it?" I was taken aback. "I did, years ago. Before life got too busy. It's beautiful," he said simply. "It looks like a memory you're trying to keep from fading." That single sentence cracked something open. We drifted away from small talk into the territory of the soul. I told him about my years living near the coast, the sound of the ocean, the husband I had lost, and the woman I used to be before I became just David's mother, or the elderly neighbor. Julian didn't interrupt. He nodded, his expression shifting with every turn of my story, offering small questions that proved he was walking through the memories right beside me. The kettle began to whistle, a shrill reminder of the present. I poured us tea, the scent of Earl Grey rising in the steam. We sat there as the sky outside turned from blue to a bruised purple, sipping tea in a silence that felt entirely shared. "You have a way with stories, Eleanor," he said eventually, placing his cup down. "Most people just recite facts. You paint with words." I felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. It was the feeling of being seen, not as an old woman, but as a person with a complex interior life. By the time he stood up to leave, the room felt charged, as if the molecules of the air had been rearranged. "Thank you for having me," he said at the door. I didn't expect to lose track of time like that. It was refreshing. "For me as well, Julian," I replied. As I locked the door, I realized the house felt different. It wasn't just quiet, it was vibrating with the echo of connection. The following days had a new rhythm. Usually, my schedule is set in stone: gardening, reading, grocery shopping. But now, there was a hum of anticipation. I found myself wondering what Julian would think of the book I was reading. He messaged 2 days later. A polite, articulate text thanking me for the tart and the conversation. We exchanged a few messages, which grew into paragraphs about art, philosophy, and the absurdity of modern life. It was a digital lifeline I hadn't known I needed. A week later, he asked if he could stop by again. He wanted to show me a first draft of a chapter he was writing. I agreed immediately, feeling a flutter of excitement that I hadn't felt in decades. When he arrived, the afternoon light was golden and thick. He didn't bring pastries this time, he brought his presence, which felt like enough. We settled in the sunroom again. The familiarity was instant, but there was a new layer of curiosity. He read aloud to me, his voice filling the room. It was a story about lost time and found places. When he finished, he looked at me with vulnerability. What do you think? We spent hours dissecting the emotions in his writing. I offered insights from a life lived long and full. He offered the fresh, sharp perspective of youth. It was an exchange of intellectual currency that made me feel vibrant. I noticed the way his eyes crinkled when I made a sharp observation, the way he leaned in, bridging the physical distance between our chairs. Let's stretch our legs, he suggested as the light began to fade. We walked down the garden path, the fallen leaves crunching beneath our feet like parchment. We didn't speak for a long time. It was that rare, comfortable silence where two people are simply content to exist in the same space. At the edge of the garden, near the old stone bench, he stopped and looked at me. It's strange, he admitted. I feel more understood here, in this garden with you, than I do with people my own age. Age is just a number, Julian, I said softly. Spirits recognize each other regardless of the packaging. He smiled, and for a moment, he reached out and squeezed my hand. It wasn't romantic, not in the cliché sense, but it was intimate. A human anchor in a drifting world. That evening, we shared a simple supper of soup and crusty bread. The domestic simplicity of it felt profound. We were two travelers from different times, meeting at a crossroads, sharing sustenance. When he left that night, I watched his car disappear down the lane and felt a profound sense of gratitude. I wasn't just passing time anymore, I was engaging with it. The visits became a regular occurrence. Each one was a layer of paint on a canvas, adding depth and color to my routine. One specific evening stands out. It was raining, a steady, rhythmic drumming against the glass. Julian arrived with a stack of old vinyl records under his arm. I found these at a thrift store, he said, shaking off his umbrella. I thought we could listen. We sat in the dim light of the living room, the turntable spinning, filling the air with the crackling warmth of jazz and blues. The music acted as a time machine. I told him about the dances I went to in the 60s. He told me about his fears for the future, his insecurities as an artist. In the semi-darkness, the decades between us evaporated. We were just two souls seeking comfort. I looked at him, his youthful features, the intensity of his gaze, and felt a fierce, protective affection. And I knew he felt a reverence for me. You've changed things for me, Eleanor, he said quietly over the sound of a saxophone solo. You've taught me that life doesn't narrow as you get older. It deepens. I felt tears prick my eyes. And you, Julian, have reminded me that I'm still part of the world. He reached across the space between us and took my hand again, holding it firmly this time. We sat there hand in hand, listening to the rain and the music, letting the weight of the connection settle over us. It was a pure, undefined love, deeper than friendship, distinct from romance. It was a soul recognition. When he eventually stood to leave, the rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening and renewed. Same time next week, he asked at the door. I'll put the kettle on, I promised. As I closed the door that night, I leaned against the wood and closed my eyes. I thought about how easy it is to believe that the best parts of life are behind you when you reach a certain age. But that Tuesday evening, and all the evenings that followed, proved me wrong. Life is full of hidden doors and unexpected guests. It's about the willingness to open the door, to let the light in, and to realize that as long as we are breathing, we are capable of deep, transformative connection. My home is quiet again now, but it's no longer empty. It's filled with the promise of the next visit, the next conversation, and the beautiful realization that even at 78, the story isn't over. In fact, in many ways, a brand new chapter has just begun. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please share it with someone you cherish. Remember to subscribe and like the video, as it helps us bring more stories like this to you. Until next time, keep your heart open to the surprises life has in store.